We now have our question and answer session, so I'd like to invite the speakers for this afternoon to join me here. Right, I'd like to kick off with a question, which is, in the course of today we've covered in overview a lot of audio networking material. My question for you is, what did we leave out? What did we overlook? What have we missed? Any comments?
The integration of video and other signals with audio. I know it was mentioned at times, but in the broadcast industry, obviously, video's 10 times more important than audio. So I think with Ultra HD TV, possibly loss of coax to distribute those signals, that an awful lot of audio in the future is going to be passed on the same cables as...
Right, you may be aware that SMPTE and EBU are working together to define a new IT-based infrastructure for broadcasting centres. And we are working very closely with SMPTE for that. The AS takes the view that organising the sound in a way that is not compatible with video would be the most stupid thing imaginable. So we do not propose to do that. But we are working actively with them. They're still working on their part of the networking process, but we're very keen that the metadata and the transport streams and all of that work in harmony, because otherwise, as you rightly point out, that would be stupid. Very good point.
I think the one thing I would have mentioned would be S2022, so the carriage of contribution circuits over wide area networks. Not one of my standards, I'm afraid, so I can't speak knowledgeably to it, and so I don't intend to try.
My name's Phil Wagner. I'm with Focusrite. Nice to be here in England. Dan, you said that it would be difficult to implement a live touring environment with networking. I didn't quite understand that comment.
I think mostly from my experience and my point of view, it comes down to latency and managing it. There's no doubt that some of these network systems are capable of delivering the channel count in raw terms, but live engineers are a funny bunch of people, and I think the rigors of touring, the physical nature of it, pulling systems apart, putting them back together every day. No network engineers in sight. These are touring engineers that are managing the systems. We have already given them an ecosystem that delivers exactly what they want, and I see no benefit in delivering an alternative system based on IP networking that actually, in many respects, might make it worse for them.
So we have a system out with Claire Brothers, an Usher with DiGiCo, and there's virtually no latency whatsoever, 96 channels and 96K.
Yeah, but 96 channels and 96K would not deliver enough bandwidth for many of the large touring systems. You mentioned Claire. I was lucky enough to help design the U2 touring system. That wouldn't get anywhere close to.
But
that might
no
do
limitation.
edge guitars. I mean, it was not even close to touching what would actually the real world requirements be.
Today, there's no limitation to 500 channels very easily, with no appreciable latency.
Well, money's no object, of course. Channel count.
There's no additional cost for the channel count. You don't need a MADI router, so you just plug it in and go, and it's a very fair price.
Well, I'm not saying there aren't alternatives. I'm just saying from my experience. With the touring systems that I get involved with. I mean, you mentioned Claire, they're one of our biggest clients and we work a lot with them. DiGiCo is their preferred console and Opticore is their preferred audio network for nearly every tour that goes out with them. And that's obviously for a reason.
We're changing it.
No, you're not.
A little bit at a time.
Outside. Time for another question. Microphone over here. Kevin?
Kevin Hilton, freelance journalist. Just listening to what Patrick Warrington was saying this morning about using the Hydra 2 as a system within itself and then interfacing with IP, and then listening to Dan this afternoon talking about different setups and formations for different applications. I just wonder whether there's anything that's, probably it's a question for Martin, that broadcast can learn from live, because it does seem that it's going very steadily towards IP and possibly Ravenna, but whether there should be any variation in this and not just towards the audio over IP direction that Dante and Ravenna seem to be taking networking at the moment.
Yeah, I think I was very interested this morning in the debate, I think I could politely call it, about protocols versus standards. And I think that that's probably the key to this element of it. With a very large network, the network technology, let's face it, is developing all the time very quickly. Some of that is because the hardware is developing, and probably just as importantly, for the same amount of money, you can get a lot more hardware with IP-based material because of the sheer scale of it. At the same time, though, I think there's a lot more flexibility, especially in control, where proprietary networks are concerned. The sort of 25,000 plus ports on our system, I think, will be a lot harder to implement in some of the competing systems out there. And I think that in those cases, it's almost a flexibility of a bespoke design, if you like. It's a very close cooperation with the manufacturer to achieve. We've built quite a lot of new things in between us into that system. Again, because of control elements more than scale or performance or anything else. So I think those sort of core elements are already available, whichever technology you go for. It's more down to how your users want to and can interface with the control of those systems.
And just as an extension from that, I was saying about going in the audio over IP direction. Jan wants to come in on this, but it's, as I understand it, AVB is Ethernet infrastructure, and that can interface with Dante and Ravenna for the audio over IP aspect. But that means that you can probably have any other, MADI or anything else on top of that. So I suppose almost asking the same question in a different way. Is it that we are just going in the IP direction and moving away from other aspects, other technologies that are already being used?
In a broad sense, you mean? The whole infrastructure of TV going IP, you mean?
Yes. I mean, at the same time that MADI has come back into contention and has been very much, just written something about the new CTV 4K truck, and everything's MADI within the truck, and then coming out, it goes to Dolby E or whatever else. So,
well, I think anything you build at the moment has to be able to interface with everything else out there to be of any use. So you could do something that was totally insular, but it wouldn't actually be a real-world thing. I think this is often the problem. If you started from scratch with a blank piece of paper, you probably wouldn't do it the way we do things at the moment, but things have to evolve and interact all the time, and that's one of the biggest considerations, and to some extent one of the biggest compromises that we end up having to make. But yes, I do think that it's inevitable from a cost point of view, if nothing else, that we'll end up with an IP-based structure of some sort or other. But how long that will take is the $64,000 question, really.
Question.
That's Peter Stevens, BBC. Claude, you mentioned quality of service in your discussions. Did you find you had to actually use it, or was it effective if you did use it?
No, our users are mandated to take advantage of it. I mean, when they deploy a switch in their system, you have to set it up. I mean, we recommend managed switches to do that, and it does make a lot of sense to follow the simple rule we provide them to assign the three quality of services in their switch. When they do that, this is what I wanted to say. This is enough of as much as we can figure it out to guarantee that over the time they use their systems, they didn't encounter congestions and things of that sort.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I've got one other comment in terms of control. It's a bit like education, isn't it? Certainly within the AES, there's been a lot of discussion over the various sort of type of protocol networks for control and things like that in the past. And Mark has already mentioned about the work being done in the AES on control. There's also some work on control being done in the EBU as well, with some initial kick-off meetings next month in January to try and see if we can find maybe something similar to sort of a baseline point where you've got control which will cover a number of different aspects but not cover everything, a little bit like AES 67 and ASIP and so on and so forth. So really for information more than anything else at the moment.
Yes, and we're also aware that SMPTE have also work on control, and at the moment we haven't brought all those together and to see if they coexist or fight. So that's an interesting task for early part of next year.
Yes.
Chris.
Chris Jenkins, Solid Logic. I just wanted to add to the control aspect. Basically, until you sort the control aspect out, the concept of reaching for a knob on your mixer to control a network to connect a microphone and put the pad in will not exist.
You are so right.
It's a vital part of what has to happen next.
That's why I had to conclude my presentation with that. This is now the main
we see
topic.
this with AES 42 that you and radio mics and things like that. That now you have to have another computer to control the microphones, and you almost have to employ another operator to do this.
Actually, with the AS42, we developed an AS42 card for DiGiCo a few years back, working with Sennheiser. There was this big promise that it was going to go that way. I think we sold 8 cards, all of them to Sennheiser, and no one's bought one since.
Well,
no one seems to care, actually. And I can't help but think this is going to take the same route.
Yeah, we just run across this in France, and there's a tie-up with Ravenna and Larvo and digital mic control and things like that. So it's beginning to raise its head.
There will be islands, and those islands will grow with time.
But what we don't want to do is have to write specific interfaces for every single microphone.
And do you think users will want to replace perfectly good microphones with another microphone that does the same thing just for the sake of a network connection?
But if we go down the route, which was the suggestion that we need to start with microphones that are native network devices, then if you change the microphone and then the controls doesn't work because you didn't write that interface software, it's crazy. That's my bit.
I think the further out you get from the core of your network, the less important that becomes. I think where the technology revolution needs to take place, and therefore the control revolution, is centric focused rather than at the extremities. But those will be addressed, no doubt, eventually. Who knows? We might be revisiting AS42 in 10 years' time. But I'd rather think we would have moved on by then.
You won't be surprised to find that there are some moves to look at exactly this within the AS42 community for the obvious reasons.
Mark, my name is John Madden. I'm a sound supervisor in RTE in Dublin. My question is for Martin. Martin, we've recently deployed some Hydra 2 and Hydra 1 in RTE with our Calric consoles, and as you know, there's a lot of resilience there in those systems, both with power and the 2 fibre ports. But one of the things I wanted to get your advice on is a lot of our system integrators, when they fit out fibre installations that have redundancy, they'll often run multi-core fibre cables from one point to one point. And I'm just curious if you would consider that to be a weakness, in that we have the redundancy of 2 ports, but would you ever consider cable runs going alternative routes around a building to give extra levels of resilience? Or because if the cable goes, you can have as many fibre ports as you like, but if the cable is damaged in an installation, then both are gone. So do you vindicate going alternative routes around a building with fibre?
So just to clarify, the multi-core is an analog backup, you're saying? Sorry,
well, it's instead of a single cable, it's just it's a ruggedized cable with more than one fibre core in it. It's like multi-core, like we would have had multi-core analog cables, but it's multi-core fibre as opposed to multi-mode or single mode. It's just a multi-core. So the 2 connections arrive at the one point at the same time, just fanning out from the one cable.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is resilience through redundancy, but it's still fibre?
Yeah, it's still fibre, yeah.
I think certainly the Calric Hydra 2 system, I'm sure most of the other systems use redundant fibre connections rather than a single one. So you can actually have 2 paths for the primary and secondary, and then they feed back to 2 separate router cards in the case of the Hydra system. So there's an element of redundancy at each point in the chain. And I'm probably not the right person to ask, because all our I/O boxes, almost without exception, are in relatively fixed and therefore relatively safe positions. Whereas you talk to some of the guys like telegenic guys here doing outside broadcasts, I think it's in those kind of environments where you would consider that kind of redundancy more a threat. But within a relatively fixed installation, the only single core point of failure, if you like, is in the analog element of getting the mic signal from the microphone head to the I/O box.
Questions? Excellent. Well, in which case, I intend to close today's proceedings. I'd like to thank all the speakers who've spoken today. We're very grateful for their contribution, and we've all learnt a lot. Thank you.